Talk Back with Bharati Jagdish and Daniel Martin on 938 Live.
Now it's part 3 of our special series of Talk Back Town Hall, where ministers will answer your questions on policy issues. Also sharing the thinking behind the policies from manpower to the economy. In today's edition of Talk Back Town Hall, our guest is Acting Minister for Community Development, Youth and Sports and Minister of State for Information, Communications and the Arts, Mr. Chan Chun Sing. Today we'll be focusing on how we can better involve the next generation to embrace the family institution. Now, in a developed nation where time is scarce, where financial concerns seem to be dominating the psyche of Singaporeans, what is your view on the importance of family in any society?
Well, I think the family will always remain central to our society, because if we take a step back and ask ourselves, whenever we work so hard, we try so hard to get the next deal, to earn the next $1,000 or the next $1 million, what it is in it for us and what is the meaning of it all. And if we take a step back, I think very often we realize that we don't do it just for ourselves, we do it for our family, for our loved ones, and they are really the people that provide meaning to all the things that we want to do. But of course, I mean, the family is also a source of comfort when we are down, but beyond asking ourselves what the family can give us, I think the family is also the place where we have the opportunity to contribute something, to give something beyond what we want to do for ourselves. And that makes us special as humans.
The family can be a very personal and powerful experience. So bearing that in mind, I'd love to ask you what your childhood was like growing up, actually. Do you have fondest memories of being in your family and your family memories?
I grew up largely with my maternal grandmother because my mother was taking 2 jobs at that point in time, and I spent a lot of time with her, and I have fond memories of my time with my grandmother. She wasn't able to walk very well because she was very old, so we used to play cards, and that was where I learned my mathematics from her. And because she's not very mobile in her old age, she would always share stories with us, and through all these short little stories, I think they have helped to shape my own values and my outlook in life, and in a way it's a bit of a values transmission in a very subtle way.
What sort of values?
Yeah. I mean, the values like taking care of your family, being honorable in all the things that you do, being true to your friends, you know, all these are, I think, important values that everyone should grow up with.
What about your mom and dad then? You said your mom was really busy, 2 jobs.
My parents were divorced when I was very young, so my mom was the sole breadwinner for my family, and she took on 2 jobs. In the daytime, she was a machine operator working in the aluminum plate stamping company, you know, those chicken essence bottle, those caps. We made those caps, and at night she would be cleaning the offices in one of the industrial complex near our house.
I'm sure you must have got valuable lessons and values from the experience of your mum as well in this experience.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, we saw how hard she has to work to bring us up, and I think within us there's a sense that we should try our best to work hard and do justice to all the good work that she has done for us.
To what extent did you regret the fact that you didn't really get to spend much time with her as a result?
Well, I won't say I didn't have much time to spend with her, because for every moment that she's home, I think we will make it a point to make sure that we talk about issues that came up, things that we found challenging, and she would share with us her own experiences as well. So those are moments that we treasure, even though it may not be very long in terms of the time, but it is quality time that we spend together.
That's a key point that we should bring up, actually, the idea of time and key quality time. We know that parents play such a crucial role in the shaping of the character, and spending quality time with them every day is seen as an investment in the future by many families. Talk to us about, what do you have to say to parents? We know that in Singapore, many of our listeners are probably already in the office right now, and they'll be there until, you know, quite late in the day, perhaps spending quite a little bit amount of time with the family, unfortunately, because of these long hours. What do you say to those parents who are clocking these long hours and finding it difficult to set aside time for children?
I would just share a story that one of my seniors used to share with me when I was much younger. And he asked me this thing, he says, can you tell me what is a hobby? Is a hobby something that you do when you have time? or is a hobby something that you make time to do? He said, and he told me that if the hobby is something that you do only when you have time, then chances are that we will never get on with our hobby because we are ever so busy. So he said that a hobby is something that you really have to make time to do. And if you replace the word hobby with family or children, family and children are really people whom we want to really make time. We don't want to give leftovers to our family or children, and I don't think that will do justice to them. And I don't think they will feel appreciated if they get the feeling that we are only giving them the leftover of our time. So indeed it is very challenging, but all of us will need to make that conscious effort to really make time for our families.
What goes into your making a conscious effort to do this? How do you set aside time for your kids and your family?
Yeah. I think for me, a couple of things I always bear in mind. The first thing is that I need to schedule my time carefully and to protect some of the time that I have to set aside for my family. Because if you don't, I think it's very easy for us to just fill up our whole calendar and schedule with events and activities, and then again we will be only giving leftovers to the family. That won't be fair to them. On the other hand, I consciously remind myself that I need to be very efficient and effective in the way I do things so that I don't waste time, so that I have more time for my family, that I should not procrastinate. I should deal with the issue head on and not just keep rolling it over to another day.
What kind of protected time should we have? I know we've talked about the idea of commuting with your children to school in the morning, fetching them. A lot of parents see that as very protected, valuable time. Although personally, I feel that I was sleeping in the car most of the time when my mum and dad were driving me to school. What kind of protected time? Is it really just the 15 minutes or 20 minutes you can spend before dinner? I mean, do we need to try and cultivate the kind of time that we spend with our families?
I think it's more than just that 5-10 minutes here and there. It'll be very useful if we can set aside half a day, a couple of hours dedicated to our children and our family, and not thinking about work and other things that we might be concerned with. Because I think the children feel it if they know that, well, you may be physically with me, but somehow your mind is not with me, your spirit is not with me.
Your hand might be emailing work at office at the same time.
Yeah, I find it very strange when people have family time together at a restaurant, and I see all of them fishing out their iPad and iPhone and typing away. And I always find it rather amusing to see such family dynamics at a hawker center or in a restaurant. Again, if we want to spend time and quality time with our family, then we really have to set aside all the other things that we may be concerned with at that point in time.
Mr. Chan, I'm really curious because you mentioned earlier that your parents were divorced, and I've heard a lot of people citing this as a reason for themselves not to get married and have children in the future. How did your growing years actually influence you and your wife's decision to have children and be together, in spite of the fact that you came yourself from a broken family?
It's not easy growing up with a single parent. I think the pressure on the parent is tremendous. The development of the child may be affected in some sense because they don't have both parents with them to guide them along. But I think the lesson I learned from all this is that I think the children are innocent, and as adults we should really try our best to give emphasis to the kind of the feelings that our children have, and to take them into consideration for anything that we do. So for us, I think when I grow up, I told myself that we really should try our very best to take care of our children, because they are brought into this world very innocently. They didn't choose where they go, they didn't choose to be here or there. We brought them into the world, and it's our responsibility to really take good care of them.
I want to remind our listeners that you can call in if you have any questions right now. We're asking you today, as busy working parents, do you make it a point to set aside some time every day to talk to your children? Is the role of raising a child really best left to one member or the other of the family? Do you think that as a society that we are sometimes too caught up with the challenges of raising a family to enjoy the experience? We had a question earlier on from David on our Facebook page. David Wong, good morning to you. You say that you are a father of two young children, 8 and 6 years old. and their grandpa lives with us too. I'd like to highlight that to him, cars and families like that is an absolute necessity, not a luxury. So he suggests that the government subsidize, if not waive, the COEs for families like his. This is a huge help and an attractive incentive to young families who are planning to have more children. Mr. Chan, what do you think about that? It's often been said, especially on this show, that the idea of raising a family needs to be a very holistic thing. We have to look at every aspect of it, from the groceries, from where you live, to the car.
I think if we look at the challenges of raising a family and keeping a family together, I always think that there are three aspects that we need to look into to help families born and grow. Of course, at the outermost layer, we would always have the society and the government policies coming in to help whenever we need to and wherever we can. Then at the inner ring, you have family members, relatives, that provide the emotional support and other forms of help. But at the center is really the individual and the immediate family members that needs to make certain decisions together. So if you look at Mr. David Wong's challenges, they are not atypical of some of the challenges that families are grappling with in Singapore. From the government perspective, I think we would like to provide help to some of these families as much as we can, and we would like to provide it in a way that allows them to make the decisions for themselves. So in this particular case, Mr. David Wong may require a car because that's a bit more essential for him. For some other families, a car may not be the thing that they require most. So from a government perspective, how we help them is to provide the assistance necessary for them to make their own choice. For example, if we give the baby bonus to help to defray some of the costs associated with bringing up a child, then we leave it to the respective families to decide what they want to do with that particular package of assistance, rather than dictating that, oh, you must go and get a car or you must not go and get a car, because I think we all recognize that.
To what extent is the government willing to look at these cases on a case-by-case basis and to assess each family's requirements? Because you mentioned the baby bonus, but it hasn't really succeeded in raising total fertility rates in Singapore. So perhaps the government needs to broaden its view on this issue.
In order to raise the total fertility rate, I think we have to approach it from multiple angles. If we just look at the financial incentive, I don't think that will be sufficient. We will subsequently have to talk about the values that we hold as a society. Just to give a sense of the financial incentive, I mean, if you look at it about 10 years back, our package for the marriage and procreation assistance to the family amounted to about 400 over million. But if you look at it today, 10 years later, it has gone up 4 times to about 1.6 billion. And we are continuing to look at other ways that we can help the family to defray some of the costs of bringing up the children. But having said that, I mean, that's just the financial aspect. There are other aspects that we need to look into: how the work environment is, whether employers and have a pro-family environment, and the values that we hold as individuals. Maybe I'll just share a couple of stories through my Meet the People sessions. I mean, I've met families that earn, say, $1,000 to $2,000, having 2-3 kids. And for some reason, they are able to manage their finances because they make some prioritization on what they want to spend on, and so on and so forth. And they live very happily, and the kids are happy, growing up well, and so forth. I've also, on the other hand, met couples earn $5,000-6,000 with a combined income of almost $10,000, and they'll be struggling and say that I don't have the resources to bring up the kids, and so forth. So from such stories, you get a sense that yes, financial resources are definitely important to help make families comfortable with bringing up children and so forth, but financial incentive and financial resources by themselves may not be the entire story.
We might have to use other methods to sell people on the idea of family, to get a buy-in from them on the idea of wanting a family, because as you have implied as well, if you want a family, you will do it, no matter what your financial constraints. Let's see what our next caller has to say. I believe it's Mr. Wong joining us. He actually wants to go back to the idea of work-life balance.
Work-life balance has always been a struggle for all of us in the working. But also at the same time, of course, we talk about quantity versus quality time. Maybe there could be suggestions on how we could spend quality time as opposed to just quantity. And of course, no doubt all of us have an idea from other parents how they do it, but perhaps collectively there could be something collected like a list on a government website to give suggestions so that parents like us who, unfortunately, this is not an excuse, who don't have time, can just go to that list and say, okay, look, this weekend, Saturday, Sunday, I'll do this for my family, and I just look at that list.
What do you think of that suggestion, Mr. Chan?
I think that's a good suggestion, and I think there are already some efforts by various organizations to do this. I mean, I just learned, for example, if you go to the Singapore Art Museum website, they have a lot of activities that are very family-oriented, and if you go to some other organizations' website, they also try to advertise some of the pro-family activities. But I think what the caller is suggesting is that maybe it's easier for us if they have an aggregate site, a kind of a centralized site where they can have a single source of reference. And I think there's an idea that we can definitely study, because we do not assume that everybody will know where to go and get everything. We do not assume where people might know where to go and so forth. So it's not a bad idea.
Joining us on the line on 669-11938 is Joshua.
Just like to say that it's quite amusing to find people needing government agencies to list out methods on how to engage their own family. I think we have some agency which is in charge of family planning and all that. It's all a guideline, but ultimately there's no right or wrong to parenting, and it's up to us to make time and to start a family. But of course, that being said, the government can do more to help us raise our kids easier. As in, I'm sure we could do much better with subsidies to childcare and our financial burdens on insurance or medical bills. That would help a lot in terms of helping the family to have more money to enjoy themselves in a way. Well, of course, there was one caller who said about COE. I really don't agree with that, because most of the time we'll be stuck in the jam on the roads unless they consider being in the jam with the family a very productive time as well.
Let's respond to Joshua said. Subsidies need to be upped on certain other areas. What do you think of that, Mr. Chan?
In fact, I think that is something that we have been doing over the years. So if you look at childcare, for example, I think we have tried very hard to do a couple of things. One is to give the subsidies to the parents to help them defray the cost of bringing up the children. The other thing that we have done behind the scene is really to see how we can manage the cost better, how we can help the childcare centres achieve greater economies of scale so that they can provide the services at more affordable prices. But having said that, I must also caution and share with the listeners one of the not so positive examples of subsidies. Once upon a time, when we provided the subsidies for some of the families for their childcare, instead of using the subsidy to provide the same childcare, they took the subsidy, they went on to chase a more expensive childcare service. So in the end, they still have to pay as much as before. And this is something that is quite difficult to manage, which is why instead of using what we call the demand-side subsidies by giving people vouchers, may create these unintended consequences of people trying to chase more expensive childcare because they equate that with quality. We are trying to see how we can make sure we control the costs and really provide affordable childcare for those people in need, especially the lower middle income group.
Hi, Mr. Wong.
Yeah, I'd just like the ministry to see whether they can help this group of caregivers, namely the nannies, because they are actually paid by the parents of the child to take care of their children. But I just feel that if the ministry can have to recognize the effort by giving them some workfare subsidies, or workfare bonus, something like that, that'd be good. Yeah, to help them as well.
Mr. Chan, would you respond to that?
Well, I think for us, there's always a shortage of manpower to help take care of the children. So as a society, we are trying to see how best to use the finite manpower that we have to manage the childcare centers and take care of the children who may be choosing to stay at home. So it's not easy for us. At this point in time, I think our focus is to find ways to help the childcare centers make efficient use of their manpower so that they enjoy greater economies of scale, so that they can help to bring down the prices that they are charging at this point in time. For those people that choose to take care of their children at home, perhaps with the assistance of nannies and other forms of help, we'll see what we can do to recognize the effort. And certainly we recognize that different children have different needs, different families have different needs, and we will need a suite of tools to help different families to take care of themselves.
Edmund, standing by now.
I have 2 young children, and considering that the high cost of living here, it's very difficult to have a 3rd child. Actually, I feel that the government should go all out to help young families to have more children in terms of targeting specific policies to help them cut costs in terms of housing, transport, medical, and most important, education. These 4 aspects will greatly help to increase our birth rate.
Thank you, Edmund. Your comment is very much in line with a Facebook comment that we had from Tech Wee Ung. Wee Ung, you say avoid subsidies as much as possible and focus on easing parameters for growing families, such as lower taxes, priority get bigger size flats, schemes to encourage employers to employ and retain employees with families. Thanks for your comment. Mr. Chan, let's come to you. Specific parameters, what Edmund is suggesting, what Wee Ung is suggesting as well. What is your response to that?
I agree with those suggestions. In fact, those are some of the things that we are looking at. For example, giving tax breaks to families with more children, giving priority to families with children, how to make sure that we lower the cost of living and making it affordable for people to have childcare. These are all the things that we need to do to help our families cope with raising the children in a very fast-paced society like ours. But I thought the other point that was interesting made was that this thing about having a more pro-family work environment so that we can encourage our young couples to have kids. I think one of the things that all of us can do as employers is to see how we can design our jobs to make it a bit more family friendly. And sometimes we have to change some of the habits that we have. For example, do not have this 24/7 email, SMS that keep bugging the young couples even when they are off duty. And I think all these are small little things, but it helps to create a more pro-family environment. When I was overseas in one particular country, they have very strict social norms for the bosses not to bother their employees when they are off duty. I mean, you don't bug them with SMSs and expect a reply every other hour, right into the night. You respect the family time. You don't make calls and email them over the weekends. And I think all these are helpful practices and social norms that will help contribute towards a more pro-family environment. And
how can the government encourage this among the employers? Because a lot of them have pointed out that we work some of the longest hours in the world, yet our productivity levels are so low. So this is a systemic issue. What exactly can be done about it?
I think a lot of this revolves around the practices and the work design at the workplaces. There won't be a one-size-fits-all solution, but each and every one of us as employers would have to look at our work processes to see how we can redesign some of the things that we do to be more family friendly.
I would just like to go to our phone lines right now again. Hi, John.
I would like to ask the Minister that what are some of the future policies or things that the MCYS may want to do or are planning to do to help the single parents? I would like to ask Minister would be able to say that to help the general marriage family in policies whereby the government now say that everything is productivity. I think this is a double-edged sword. Therefore, many families find it very difficult to balance their time.
I think there are 2 areas that we are working very hard on. First is to provide affordable childcare options for single parent family. Obviously, because the single parent, the sole breadwinner like my mother, would need to go and work to earn a living. So we need affordable childcare options for such families. The other thing that we are working very hard is to see how we can work with the employers to provide more flexible work arrangements for some of these single families. Because unlike a double parent family, you need to take time out to take care of your kids, to bring them to the doctor, to go to the school, to meet the teachers and so forth. So we need more flexible work arrangements for some of these single parent families. So these are the 2 things that we will be focusing our attention on.
Do you think we'll see discussion on things like, because we know that single parents, for example, don't benefit from tax relief or priority in terms of getting HTB, which are also requirements. I mean, it's affordability, it's housing as well.
I think for any families, whether is it single parent family or double parent family, I think we really want to focus on our help on those families that really need it, rather than having what we call universal help for everybody. So we have finite resources. We will focus our resources to help those families that are in financial distress, those families that need that extra bit to help them cope, be it whether they are single family or the double parent family.
A lot has been said about the financial issues surrounding this larger issue of fertility in Singapore. Clearly, that is a priority for a lot of people, even though we have mentioned there are other factors that could be shaping their decisions when it comes to having babies. You have said that, yes, these are areas we will look into, the financial issues. But really, what can we expect in the next few years?
We are now in discussions with various stakeholders to get their feedback, to see which are the areas in that financial arena that really gives us the leverage. Is it just subsidies? Is it just tax relief? Is it childcare options and so forth? And I think when we look at it holistically, we will come up with a package that will not just be putting resources in all areas, but to really focus those resources on some of the bigger, higher payoff area. For example, one of the things that we have found out is that the biggest hurdle is converting people who have married without kids to having the first kid, what we call the 0 to 1 problem. Because it's a huge psychological hurdle to clear. There are also adjustments that are required to be made to the family life when they have their first kid. And if the experience of having the first kid is not so positive, it becomes very difficult to encourage the family to go on to have the second or third kid. So we are focusing a lot of effort on trying to ease the psychological hurdle of people having the first kid, the financial issues, the psychological issues, the family support issues, the workplace issues. All these are critical for us to work on, so that we have a holistic solution beyond just the financial means.
Do you think we've been successful in that?
I think we all have to make some personal decisions. If I may, I'll just share my own story. Before we had our first kid, me and my wife, we had our respective careers, and we were always thinking about what were the adjustments that needed to be made to have our first kid. And we were very fearful of the time commitment, whether we can give our best to our kids. And these are things that I think every parent will go through. And on top of that, during that stage of our career, she was overseas at certain point in time. I was overseas at certain point in times. And quite a bit of adjustment have to be made. But I was always reminded by one of my seniors who told me that there will never be a perfect time to have kids. And sometimes we just have to give more credit to ourselves, that we are able to adjust and adapt, that when the kid comes along, we will obviously change some of our lifestyle choices, but we will manage. And I remember when my first kid was born, within the first month of her birth, I was sent overseas for an overseas posting for 2 years. And there were tremendous adjustments that needed to be made. I have to fly back on my own expenses as a weekend father. But we have to make various adjustments, and we have to bring her along with milk powder and everything. When she was barely 3 months old, going on the plane, going to a foreign land without the familiar family support and so forth. And I think all these are adjustments that we have to make. But at the end of the day, I think we feel that it's all worth it, because, and looking back, I think we have adjusted better than we could have expected in the first place. And so sometimes we just have to give ourselves that bit of credit that we are actually quite adaptable as human beings.
Now, many sociologists has pointed out that before we can even begin to tackle fertility rates, we have to get people to get married. And the fact is, marriage rates have been going down in the last few years. How do you think we can have that influence actually move forth into society? The experience that you just shared with us, that's a very personal experience. But how can we influence others to be willing to make all of these sacrifices?
I think first we should share more stories of the joys of a family, because every time we talk about, we use the word sacrifice, it conjures up that, marriage is such a terrible thing, that I have to give up all this thing, and my life will take a 90-degree turn, and so on and so forth. Yes, of course, in every phase of our life we give up something, but we also gain something. For all the singlehood that we have given up, we also get the joys of a married life. We get the joys of having kids. Nothing beats going home after a hard day's work to see your kids running up to you, giving you a hug. And I think there are many of these wonderful stories that we need to get out to share with the people who may not be married yet, that there are a lot of joys and positive things.
But it's interesting to hear you describe that, because obviously if people are choosing not to get married, that means that that choice exists. That means that for these individuals, they've said that I'd rather go down this route because the other route, what you just described, doesn't have the value that perhaps many people attach to it anymore because of the things I'm facing in the wider environment. So the value, even though we've been raised by our parents and our families, we don't see the value in family anymore, and that's why we're not getting married, perhaps.
So that is where we need to go back to the root of the issue, which is that we cannot look at having a life partner or having kids as something like an investment. What do I get out of it? If we keep going down the route of what do I get out of this, then I think it'll be rather sad, because marriage is also...
But that's the problem. We do think that way right now in society. How can you reverse this trend?
And which is why we need to share with people the stories that marriage is, and having a kid is not just about what we want to get out of it, but it is also the opportunity to contribute and to give back something. And there's always a lot of joy in being able to love someone, to care for someone, beyond having the tangible calculations of what are all the pluses and minuses, because we can never go into life getting married or having kids by counting to the nth degree of what are all the pluses and minuses. It will never be possible.
Going forward, what sorts of policy changes can we expect in terms of encouraging people to have more kids? I know that the government can only do so much, but how much can the government do?
Well, the government can only focus on that macro environment of making it affordable to have kids, encouraging employers to have more pro-family work environment and work practices. But like you say, at the end of the day, the individual has to make a choice, and we hope that when the individual make the choice, it's not just about calculating the pluses and minuses, but also the sense that I want to love somebody, I want to contribute, I want to take care of some young children and to give them the very best. And I think that sense of giving back is very different from that sense of what can I get out of it. Because if we always go on that attitude of what we can get out of it, it will be very sad, because we will be disappointed, because in marriage and having kids, they may not always live up to our expectations, just as we will never live up to other people's expectations always. So there is a bit of a give and take in that journey.